welcome to Work Your Passion, a podcast dedicated to creativity and passion. I'm your host, Rocco Jeppy. Today's guest is a 23-year U.S. Navy veteran and an award-winning fantasy and steampunk author. His imagination is a thing of dreams. Mark Piggott has published more than 5 books over the last 12 years, beginning with his debut novel, Forever Avalon, in 2009. In 2021, he won 2 awards with the Firebird Book Awards, sponsored by Speak Up Talk Radio. The Outlander War, Book 3 in the Forever Avalon series, took 2nd place in the fantasy category. And The Last Magus, A Clockwork Heart, won 1st prize for steampunk. He recently signed with Revolution Press to publish Corsair and the Sky Pirates, a steampunk historical fiction book, and also with Curious Corvid Publishing to publish a fantasy poetry novella. As George R.R. Martin once said, "The best fantasy is written in the language of dreams," and Mark's worlds are proof that he is fluent in speaking such a language. And now, Work Your Passion, Episode 2, the one with Mark Piggott. Hello, Mark. Thanks for joining me on the Work Your Passion podcast. It's an honor to have you here today.
It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me for this.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Before we get into the questions we have here today, I just wanted to start by saying thank you for your service. My grandfather, the man after whom I was named, served in the Navy and fought in the Second World War on the USS Ellison. And so I know the commitment, the honor, that all of that goes along with serving in the military. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I do appreciate that. And thank you, your grandfather, for his service as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I like to start each episode in the spirit of the late, great James Lipton, the host of Inside the Actor's Studio. So I guess that's my little citation there, so I don't get accused of plagiarism. He would begin every episode by saying, let's start at the beginning. So with that, Mark, tell me first, where were you born?
Well, I'm a military brat myself. As a matter of fact, my father served in the Marine Corps for 23 years. So I was actually born in Cherry Point, North Carolina, at the Marine Corps Air Station there.
Excellent. And do you have any siblings?
I have a brother and a sister, both older. I'm the baby of the family. So they're both older than me.
Tell me about your parents, what type of people they were. I know you said your dad was in the military, so I'm sure there was a lot of influence there, but tell me about both your parents.
Well, actually, my mom and dad were both in the military. That's where they met. My dad was a Marine. My mom served also in the Navy. And so that's where they met. But, back in those days when they got married and the woman got pregnant, she had to get out of the service. So my mom only spent a few years in the Navy and such, because then she became a stay-at-home mom and took care of our kids while my dad was deployed a lot. He actually did 2 tours in Vietnam. And I've traveled a lot around the country with him: North Carolina, New Jersey, California, Hawaii, just to name a few places he was stationed at. So we traveled around a lot. And then when he retired from active duty, he settled down back in his hometown, which became mine, of Phillipsburg, New Jersey. It's a little town about an hour or so north of Philadelphia, right outside the Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania, across the river there. So Phillipsburg, where he worked for his parents' company until my grandparents passed away, and such that the company went as well. And they just basically lived there their entire lives.
What type of company was that?
It was a sewer and water main installation is what they did for it. Basically, it was basic construction. They did that for years. Even when I was a kid, we always used to go over there and play on the trucks and the dozers and things. Just used to hang around there and such. So that was a lot of fun for a kid.
As a military brat, as you said, talk about what your childhood was like.
Well, I mean, it was a lot of unfortunately, it's one of those things that a lot of us in the military, and my kids experienced it, of course, is that you make friends in an area. You're only there for 3 years or so, and then you pick up and moving on to the next location. So, I was in multiple different schools my entire life until right before high school, middle school area, and that's when we settled down in Jersey, and I finished my schooling there.
How much did that experience, and we'll get into it in a little bit more detail here later, but how much of that experience growing up in that atmosphere influenced you, not only in your decision to enter the military, but now as a writer as well?
Well, it was more on the creativity side that it influenced me, because when you're doing that much moving around, you get into other things to try to take your mind away from, all the picking up and moving half the time. So I was, that time of my life, I was heavily into comic books. I bought and collected comic books as a kid. I even, started creating my own characters and developing my own stories and things. So that's kind of where a lot of my creativity started, was at that young age, was through the comic books. And actually, when originally I didn't want to, because of my experience with my father, I really didn't want to do anything with the military. I wanted to be a comic book artist and, be the next Jack Kirby and Stan Lee. But just things didn't pan out. And, when you're a 20 something year old and you got to find that niche of what you want to do in your life, the military has a lot of good options. And so I went that route and joined the Navy, and became a Navy journalist, as a matter of fact. So I think it was just a progression, really, from my young life to my adult life.
So when you break down the word, when you sit and really think about it, and you've touched on a couple of really good points here today so far, what does creativity mean to you?
I mean, creativity is that spark of imagination that stirs inside, and it comes from inside you. But at the same time, a lot of outside influences helps, to me, in my own way, helps me build on that creativity and learn from it and work at it even better. I mean, like I said, as a young boy, comic books was a major part of my influence. In my young adult life, I spent a lot of my college years and my early years in the Navy. Actually, I played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, and so that helped spur that creativity, that imagination as well. And then it's progressed to today with my biggest influencer today, to me, is anime. I love anime, and that's some of the best stories out there. And I just love seeing what they create, and it helps me think of things as what I'm doing in my stories as well.
You retired from active military duty in 2006. 3 years later, 2009, you released your debut novel, Forever Avalon. Your second novel, The Dark Tides, hit bookshelves in 2014. And The Outlander War, book 3 of the Forever Avalon series, was published in 2020. The Outlander War won second place for fantasy in the 2021 Firebird Book Awards. Your new fantasy adventure novel, The Last Magus, took first place in steampunk. You're currently working on book 4 for Forever Avalon, titled The Prometheus Engine, in addition to Dragonfire and Steel, book 2 in the Last Magus series. For listeners that might not be familiar with or aware of your genre of choice, fantasy steampunk, explain what that is.
Well, I think if you've gone through life in any library, you've experienced fantasy and steampunk. To talk about steampunk first, if you've read anything of Jules Verne or H.G. Wells, they are considered the godfathers of steampunk, because that's the whole thing about it, is bringing that modern technology into a Victorian era, and that's what they did. They were so far ahead of their time, they didn't even realize it. And we today have taken that genre and made it into something more so with just when you look at the different things, the goggles, gears, and the mechanics of some of the things that people create for steampunk. I went to a market in DC last year, or year before last, excuse me, and found this wonderful steampunk lamp. And it's it's using piping and different Art Deco kind of style to it, but then in the middle of it is this gauge, and I found out from the guy who created it, it's the gauge off of a submarine, of an old diesel submarine. And that, first off, that tied to me with my Navy automatically, but at the same time, it's just so cool the way he was able to put that together and things. And again, going back to that idea of creativity, steampunk gives people that, and so does fantasy, because in those genres, anything is possible. That's the great thing about it. science fiction has to adhere to practices of science. I mean, when you think back to when Gene Roddenberry did Star Trek, he based all of his stuff. He talked to scientists and he based it. And that's the thing about science fiction. There is a scientific fact behind it. But with fantasy and things like that, anything's possible because you can do it through magic or other things. And that makes it such an incredible genre to write in. And that's what I enjoy about it.
I would also imagine that along those lines, it has its pluses and minuses to be able to create basically anything that your mind can imagine, but also there are some downsides to that as well. So take me through that. Take me through the pros and cons, what the process is like for you when you're writing one of your novels.
For me, if it's all based around research. I mean, because it's not just sitting down and writing. There's a lot of research involved, and I can, when you think for my Forever Avalon series, first off, it's based on the Arthurian legend, so I had to be well versed in the characters and the lore and mythology of that, and then at the same time, I wanted to bring in other mythologies of magic at that time period or within that same general time frame to bring them together. And so I had to research the mythologies of Scandinavia and the north, of Russia, of Germany, England, Ireland, all of those. They come together and they cross over in some different areas because, just to give an example, there are dwarves and elves in Scandinavian culture, and at the same time, there's also in Germanic culture. But they have different ways of interpreting them, but they're still similar in some respects. And even that even crosses into when you go into Russia, or if you go even down into Australia and Africa, which I've also researched, the mythologies there. A lot of the different creation stories sometimes cross over and things. So it's a lot of research involved in that. And so that's what consumes a lot of my time in writing this, because I'm tapping into that fantasy, that mythology, but I also want to be respectful to it. I don't want to just, I can create things on my own. You can create your own gods and things like that, but it's also great to tie it into what has been part of the story all of our generations. I mean, that's what being a storyteller is. It's passing that story from generation to generation. So I'm tapping into those first storytellers that wrote about these gods and things and myths and bringing it to today.
Yeah, it's very interesting because some of that is what I think about when I read something that I originally either had little or no interest in, or I'm just reading something that somebody I know has written. But it's getting that information to people from a historical standpoint, and it doesn't necessarily have to be labeled historical fiction. But to your point, in the research, you're bringing some of the nonfiction into the fiction world, and just making beautiful books out of it. I'm that type of person that whether I'm watching a TV show or I'm reading a historical fiction book, I finish a chapter or I finish a show, and I'm looking stuff up online. What part of this is real, what part of it is the author's interpretation, and things of that nature.
That was even harder. Just something to mention is I've just recently signed with a company or publishing house, Revolutionary Press, and they're going to be publishing a full steampunk novel of mine. It's a full steampunk historical fiction called Corsair and the Sky Pirates. And in this story, I'm creating a new universe, by bringing that steam powered future technology to the late 1800s, early 1900s, but I'm mixing original characters with historical characters. So I had to do research on Thomas Edison, Nikola Tesla, Geronimo, other historical figures, and what was going on that time, and I'm reworking history to fit my narrative, but at the same time, again, being respectful to that, and working that together. That was even more intense than my fantasy writing, because these are actual people who have lived. I mean, I'm giving them a new story in mine, but you still have to be respectful of the fact that these were actually living, breathing people.
It's very cool and interesting stuff. And, who among us have not, wondered what, George Washington or Abe Lincoln or, you know, Grant and Lee would do with some of the modern technologies of the world today.
Well, if it just give if anybody wants to read along those lines, there's a great author out there. He's one of my favorites, Harry Turtledove. He is a historical fiction writer, and he does his great story. One of his books is starts off with a series of "How Few Remain" is the title of the book, and he took one event where General Lee was passing around battle plans, and he had these couriers take these plans to his different generals,
Mhm.
and one of them wrapped the plans around a bunch of cigars, and he lost them, and in losing them was picked up by a Union soldier who then they knew Lee's plans, and that was a turning point of the war. So basically he changed it to where the cigar that never happened, and where the South eventually won the war,
Oh, wow.
and how the United States changed
Mhm.
from that one event, just that one little event, how it changed our country so much. And I mean, he painstakingly goes through the details of the different people through history from Lincoln on. I mean, it's incredible when you his writing. He is one of my favorite authors when it comes to just the historical fiction aspect is just brilliant.
Well, you've just appealed to the Civil War side of me, and I wouldn't. I'd come just very close to calling myself a Civil War buff. I couldn't sit in a room with people and remember dates and times and everything exactly like that. But there was a time in history where I probably could have gotten summer jobs working tours at Gettysburg. It's one of my favorite places to visit.
Oh
I
yeah.
love Civil War history.
Well, then this series is definitely one you should look up. You will enjoy it.
I will have to do that. So you've touched on this a lot, but I want to go a little bit further and get, maybe a little bit more information from you. And it's really great when sometimes as you're going along in these interviews, some of your questions can get answered along the way. But I do want to press a little bit on you here.
Mhm.
Why do you write fantasy and steampunk? And for those not reading those genres, why should they?
I write them because it's just that's been a part of me, and I guess the best way to explain it is to going back to my early days in the Navy, which is where the story developed from. Um, Back in the early '80s, when you were a sailor at sea, you didn't have internet, video game consoles, email, none of that. Your time was spent off duty, maybe playing some board games. Guys set up on the mess decks playing dominoes. We had actually our own arcade on some ships where, video game machines, you drop your quarter in, they were scattered around the ship. You could play on your off duty time if you wanted to. Simple things like that. Nothing, satellite TV, no live sports games, nothing like that. So back then, of course, Dungeons and Dragons was very popular, and I was heavy into that. I had a group of friends, and we would spend our nights after we're off duty. We would go into an aircraft elevator maintenance room, which late at night was pretty empty. So it was one of my friends was at his space, so we would go in there. We would just sit around and we would play for a few hours every night, few hours, whenever we were able to, and we just play Dungeons and Dragons. And that was a way to kill time when you're working 16-hour plus days and you're deployed away from your family. That was a way to kill time for me. So I played a lot of D&D and other role-playing games. Uh, and I had just gotten married. My oldest daughter, she was a baby at the time, just born. So your mind starts to do weird things. So I started having a recurring dream about being on an island of fantasy and magic with my wife. And then when as my kids grew up and were born, they came into the dream. Every time I would deploy, I had this dream, and it was a constant thing. And so finally, my last deployment, believe it or not, I was on the USS Enterprise, the aircraft carrier. I was in 2001. And I finally said to myself, I got to write this down. So I started writing and I started developing the story, and I needed a framework. So again, the King Arthur legend was a great thing for me to use because I was very familiar with it, and so I used that as the basis for my story and my island, and mixed a little D&D influence in there with it as well. Even the characters in the book, the family that's the basis of the Forever Avalon series, they're based around the characteristics and personalities of my own family, because it was easy to do that way.
Hmm.
Even their names are all of their middle names of my family. So it was just a way, it was not only was a way for me to connect with my family while being deployed, but at the same time, it was a way for me to work things into my story so much easier as a writer. I found it that way. And I laid the story out and everything. And by the end of the deployment, I had finished the book. Just a first rough, very rough draft. And the funny thing is as soon as I finished writing that book, I stopped having the dream.
Oh man.
So it was one of those things that just, to me, it was meant to be. And I've just, that's how I've just worked from, is that, fantasy, it is that escapism. That's why we need it, why people need to read it, because it does provide that escapism. You can't always get it from a TV show
Hmm.
or a movie, but you can always find it in a book, because books are so varied. I've connected with a great independent author community on social media, and believe me, you can find so many out there, so many creative authors that just their writing it's not, it's none of ours is perfect. I'm the first to admit that I'm not perfect as a writer, but but we're great storytellers, and there's so many great stories out there that you can just find something that you can get into and read and escape into, and there's just so much out there.
One of the things that you brought up in that answer is very interesting to me in your reoccurring dream is our first episode I talked to Kendra Patterson, and throughout that interview, she just keeps mentioning the word intuition. And I think, those reoccurring dreams, that's our mind telling us, hey, this is what you're supposed to be doing. This is what you're doing.
Yeah.
And then in your case, you do it, you put it out, and you haven't had the dream since. I mean, it doesn't get much more intuitive than that.
And that happens to me more often than not. I mean, the last Magus was a dream I had. I just had that opening scene of the novel where he wakes up at the crossroads, no memories, not knowing who he is, where he's from, and you know, just that, from that little glimmer in a dream that I had, I took that and developed the whole story and the whole idea behind it. Um, it's I just recently wrote for a short story contest. I wrote my first horror short. It was a horror short story. And it was based on a nightmare. I woke up one night and I just had this terrible nightmare. And I just, I remembered it so vividly the next day that I just started writing down things about it. And I think when you have that creativity, that spark inside you, it's not that it comes naturally, but it's there.
Mhm.
And I think as a writer, you know how to act upon it. People have dreams all the time, but as a writer, we act upon it and say, how can I develop this into a story that people will want to read? And that's where we go from.
It's amazing stuff, and so true. I mean, I can definitely relate to that. I mean, I have an idea that my time management is not as good as yours. So that idea has been sitting in the draft phase for years now. But it came from a dream, and talking to the few people, and I'm very secretive when I have my ideas because I don't want anybody else to touch them until I have a chance to. But it literally came to me in a dream, the idea for a book that I have. So I can definitely relate to that. I mean, dreams are very powerful things. There are a lot of different interpretations on why out there, from Germanic tribes to Native Americans. I mean, all over Scandinavia. And if you catch the right one that quote unquote tickles your fancy, and you can develop that and take your dreams and put pen to paper, it can turn out to be some magical stuff.
Well, I can't really say my time management is very good because it's not as good as I'd like it to be. I mean, when you're trying to juggle a full-time job and then do the creative writing aspect on the side, I mean, my goal, like anybody, who is an aspiring writer, you want to do this full time. I mean, I would love to be able to just sit at home day after day and write and write and write and just push out stuff. That would be great, but unfortunately, until you get that recognition, it's, you still need to do the full-time job to pay the bills and
Sure.
and other stuff as well. But at the same time, when you're talking about with the creativity side in my head, I like to think of it. I always refer to it as a 24/7 Broadway play that just won't stop. And it's one of those things of, if I don't write it down, it's going to drive me crazy.
Hmm.
And so that's I think that's the gift, and it's also a curse for writers, because you've got to get it down, or else it's just going to be maddening.
Sure. No, I get it. My wife is constantly telling me, why don't you sleep with a notepad next to your bed? Because I'm definitely one of those people that once I get up and my feet hit the ground and I brush my teeth, I'm like, oh man, it totally leaves my head. So she has been on me to do that for years.
Yeah.
Talk about your 23 years in the Navy, and I don't want you to obviously anything that you can't divulge to us, we don't want, but any information you can give us about what you did in the Navy, and then how that prepared you for and gave you inspiration to be the author that you are today.
Well, I think the biggest thing the Navy did for me was make me the writer I am, because in the Navy, I was a Navy journalist. And I know that that sounds kind of weird, but Navy journalists have been around since uh, when you think about your war correspondence in World War II, and then getting up into Vietnam, the people who write the stories about the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, that's where part of that public affairs aspect of the military. And that's what I did for 23 years active duty, and then several more years after that as a Navy civilian, before I came into my current job. But I went through a school, it's called the Defense Information School, and that's the school for all military journalists. We all go through that. Military journalists, photographers, they all take part in that school. And so that was a big part of the training. Just getting the basics down helped me. I mean, I wrote for my high school newspaper, but not really great. I just did things as off the cuff as
Mhm.
I could. I got a little more creative and was able to do a lot more once I got into the Navy. They were able to teach me and go and bring me those skills that I needed. And so during my time, I served on 3 different aircraft carriers, uh, including like I said, the Enterprise. I've traveled mostly in the Mediterranean, the northern areas, off of Norway and such, and into the Persian Gulf and the North Arabian Sea. Um, one of the one thing I can talk about, I think through my career, I said, traveling around, you just get to see so much, and that, not speaking ill of my fellow sailors, but a lot of them, they would get into a port call and they would find the nearest bar and drink themselves to death. And that wasn't me. Unfortunately, I played the tourist because I wanted to see everything. So I went to I visited Pompeii so many times, every time, because Naples was a regular port call for us.
Mhm.
And I've been to Pompeii so many times. I saw something new and different every time I was there. Um, the one thing I really still sticks with me through my career was, I was deployed when 9/11 happened. I was on the Enterprise, and we were actually on our way home. We had just finished up time in the Persian Gulf. We were starting our stretch of about a month to get back and finish my deployment. And we watched 9/11 happen live, because then we had satellite TV. So
Mhm.
we watched it all happen live. And people can still say you could feel the ship turning around, because we knew we were going to be on station, and we were the ones that launched the first strikes against the Taliban and its forces. And that was a big part of it. And saddest thing is, I missed my daughter. Her 16th birthday I was supposed to be home right in time for her birthday, and we came home about a month late. So
Mhm.
I miss that and things, and but it was something you had to do, and it's just a part of it.
Not to stray too far off topic, but what was that experience like? Being the kind of the first ones on duty, I guess you say, with the strikes after 9/11.
I mean, it was one of those things of that a lot of the guys on the men and women on the ship, we basically felt like we wanted to go home, but no, we were
Mhm.
here. We needed to be the first ones to send that message that we will not be attacked and we will defend ourselves. And I think that's what something that we all felt we all had to do. I mean, you had when they were loading up the first bombs and things to be dropped, there were guys in the flight deck where they were writing on the bombs and everything, FDNY, for they were drawing pictures of the towers and things. It was just we were all very so just gung ho about just not gung ho in the aspect of wanting to take other lives, but it was just again just to be a part of defending ourselves and to just to be that first fight back.
Thank you for sharing that. I think there's a lot of people out there that are so thankful for the military, and there are certain things in this country I think that we take for granted day in and day out,
Yeah.
and when we hear stories like that, it's really nice to hear, because we have individuals like yourself and your fellow shipmates and fellow military members that are doing those things, and sometimes we get so caught up in the politics or the social media, and
Yep.
we wonder, well, what exactly freedoms are they fighting for? We're not these are the freedoms, these are the times and instances in history that we talk about.
Absolutely. And again, it's one of those things of, I mean, this is an interesting story I can tell with it that during that deployment, we actually one of our chaplains on board, he was actually an imam, a Muslim imam.
Hmm.
And so it was interesting having him on board through the whole deployment and then when this happened and such. But everybody it didn't change anybody's feelings towards him.
Hmm.
He was and he even the night that we launched that first attack, he did our evening prayer that night. And that says a lot that it wasn't
Hmm.
about the aspect of religion, it was about
Yeah.
the aspect of our country and what we
Yeah.
have to do.
And just the education and communication of that, so many, you saw it in the news, so many people doing things just the opposite of that, and not really understanding what all of that meant. That's
Yeah,
a great story.
absolutely.
So when did you realize not only you wanted to be an author, but that point where you said to yourself, this is actually doable?
Well, I mean, when you write your first book and then you start working through it and everything, it's and I think the process is frustrating at first, especially for a new author, because
Hmm.
back in the early 2000s, we were still mailing out, your manuscript. You had to print it. I had to print out multiple copies of it, and put it into a nice big envelope. And I bought a book of different publishers trying to find ones to send to, and I'm just mailing it out to anybody who would read it. And so it was, it wasn't. I think you don't really get that feeling until you get that box, that first box of your published book, and you open it up, and there's your book in there for the first time. That was, to me, that's the definitive moment when you realize, yeah, I'm an author now.
I'm told that's a really good feeling.
It is, but then I can honestly say there's kind of a downside to it. And again, another a great story on this is that when you get your first book, they give you courtesy copies.
Hmm.
So I got courtesy copies, and of course I gave them out to my family. And after about a couple of months, I get a letter from my mom, a letter that had 2 pages of corrections that mistakes she found in my book. That is so humbling. It's like, okay, I need to pay better attention. Spell check is the worst thing in the world for an author. You know,
Absolutely.
yeah. So that was very
Absolutely.
humbling that I had to go back through. I had to because being self-published, my first books are all self-published, and so you don't get the editing that you would like and so things get missed.
I had to laugh so hard at that, because my father, it would be the same thing. I
Yeah.
guarantee you, I could write an 120,000 word novel, and be one mistake left in that book, and he will find that mistake.
But on the positive side, the one thing I can say is that my wife is not a big fantasy reader. She does not read a lot of that, but she's read all my books and she's liked my books, and she said she enjoys reading my books. So that is at least the heartwarming side of it. That I may not convert her to read fantasy all the time, but she does like what I'm doing. So that is a positive to me, that someone who doesn't read this all the time enjoys what I'm writing.
Absolutely. I can attest to that. When you retired from active military duty and you kind of, began this journey to become a published author, what did you fear the most?
The biggest fear for me is, I think, putting myself into bankruptcy without, in trying to do this little hobby of mine. And it's the old adage, you got to spend money to make money. Yes, I understand that. But at the same time, is you don't want to do it to where it's not progressing anywhere. I mean, the hardest thing is just getting that first recognition. I mean, these awards that I won this past year for my 2 books, that was a big thing for me, that I was able to get those, because that says a lot, that, when your peers, people out, are recognizing that of your writing. And that's just that, okay, maybe there is something to there. And then, the past few months I've attended, it's the first time in a year and a half since the pandemic started, I've actually been able to go to book fairs and some other festivals and things, art music festivals I've attended, and I'm able to sit there and talk about my books to people and get them to read my books, and that they're interested in it. And that's been really positive as well, that I've been able to do that this past few months. So it's getting better, but it's just one of those things of you want to get that recognition as quickly as possible, because you don't want to bury yourself in trying to do this. But at the same time, it's also that thing I talked about before, about the 24/7 Broadway play in my head. I've got to write this stuff down. I've got to tell these stories. If I do it through simple self-publishing, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do whatever I have to try to get my books out there and such. I'm grateful that this time around I've found some good publishers that are working with me and moving ahead with me in my story. So hopefully that's the first step in a start where things are going to be looking up from here.
And I can imagine, I mean, if you don't get those ideas out in one way, shape, or form, that can be maddening in and of itself.
Yeah, it's that, but more so, it's just that I want to succeed at this. It's the thing inside me is, I have a story to tell, and I want to tell them. And there seems to be people who like my stories, who like my books. So I want to be able just to reach more. It's just hard nowadays because there's so much out there.
Yeah.
To me, what I hate the most is every time you turn on a television, they're remaking something. It's like, why are you remaking something? There are so many good books, not just mine. There's so many out there that could be great stories if you just tap into it and everything. Stop remaking the same stuff over and over again when you have things. I mean, just the fact that after all these years, they finally did Wheel of Time. Wheel of Time is one of my favorite all-time fantasy novels and series. And I just love the fact that it finally got the recognition it deserved, and things like that. But it took so long, and I kind of see that it takes, people in Hollywood and such. It takes them a little time to realize that there's more than just telling the same story over and over again, just making one tweak. No, there's more original stories out there. You can find them; they're there.
I would love for those Hollywood types to listen to some of the interviews that we have done and will do in this series, because that's what I go back to. I think it's between the want to do something quickly and make the most money from it, and in addition to that, a lack of creativity. There's just I haven't seen much creativity in Hollywood, like good creativity. And the special effects, the CGI, all that stuff's great, but in the 80s and early 90s, like when I really got into movies and such, and then started watching Like I took a history of film class my freshman year of college, and really got a huge appreciation for the Chaplins and the Marx Brothers and stuff like
Oh
that. Like,
yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
and you look at that movies, the sci-fi movies back then, and what they were able to do with really zero technology. I just feel that the creativity in Hollywood is just not there right now, and it's
No,
sad.
it's focused more towards the effects than
Hmm.
on the actual story. And again, there is no author, independent author or self-published author out there that's doing this for the money. We're
Hmm.
not. We again, a lot of us are doing this because we like to write, we want to write, and we want to tell our stories. And if I become, the get up to Stephen King level, great. I would love that. But I'm not worried about that right now. I'm just worried about telling my stories.
What does you've kind of touched on this a little bit, and I'm going to ask you maybe go a little bit further with it, but what does success mean to you, and is failure necessary for success?
Oh, it definitely is, because if you don't fail, you don't know where to go. I mean, it's like when I talked about that thing with my mother, that was a humbling moment that made me refocus things and say, okay, I need to edit better. And even this past time during the pandemic, I've done a lot more focusing on my editing.
Hmm.
Um, I did my first run with my fourth book in the Forever Island series, the Prometheus Engine, and I gave it to my wife to read during the pandemic and everything, and she gave me back something marked up so red and with red pen. It's horrifying when I look at it, but when I read through what she said, it's like, yeah, this makes sense. And it things like that make us better writers. And
Hmm.
so you have to have those little failures and things to help you move along and realize how you need to change. I mean, I'm like I said, with my store, with my, besides having my wife look at things, I've worked with some editors this
Hmm.
past time on a couple of my books. Yeah, the cost is there to have somebody edit it, but I'm producing a better product, and that's what I want. I don't want something that's people are going to find red line through. I want something that people are going to enjoy reading the first time around. So that means you have to have a little pain associated with it. Then you have to. That's a part of it. That's part of the growth.
Absolutely. I mean, that editing phase can be so humbling. I'll never forget. I was 15 years old, and I had an opportunity as a young high school journalist to go to the newly moved in Baltimore Ravens and do an interview with a professional athlete. And I was so proud of myself for writing this article. And I bring it into my journalism teacher. She's going to edit it before it gets published. And I get it back, and it looked like a scene from Sweeney Todd. I was so just
Yep.
disappointed. But then, like you said, you get to reading the suggestions, the edits, and it all starts to coalesce and make so much sense.
Right. And it makes you a better writer the next time around because you'll remember those things. What one of As my wife pointed out to me, I'm terrible at, my favorite word is just, and I use it too much in my writing. And I'm starting now to catch myself.
Hmm.
And I start typing, I see just, wait, nope. You start catching those things, and
Exactly.
it's part of that, again, just part of that process as helps you become a better writer.
When do you think you're at your most creative?
Oh boy. I mean, it with me, it's almost all the time. A lot of times, I like to think once I get into a groove, if I'm starting a book, and and I get into that, you get that groove going, um, I can just sit and write and write and write, and just it flows,
Hmm.
and everything. And I think once you get that groove going, I think that's when you can be the most creative, because it helps uh, form things, get your words together, and just it's so much easier. The hardest thing for me, writer's block, is one of the worst things. And when I get that point, I even if I just write a paragraph or a sentence a day, that's at least something in there. And then I just have to push my way through it sometimes, and that can be so overwhelming. But with the creativity part of it, I think with me, a lot of it is just in my research. That's where I think I get the most of it. because when you're sitting down and you're reading through this stuff and it's like, oh my, that really, that hits home. I know exactly how to use that and everything. You figure things out and it just clicks.
What really motivates you both in life and in your writing?
For me, a lot of it just revolves around my family because they were such a big part of the first stories, the Forever Avalon series. That is my thing. I mean, that's why all my social medias, I use Forever Avalon in my social media because that's who I am. That was the first series I wrote, the first books I wrote. I'm writing other stuff. I'm
Mhm.
writing a lot of other stuff, different stuff, but that is what I want to be known for because that's where it's all started for me and things. And it again, it just family because my family was at the center of that story, and they are continue to inspire me as I work through each and every story in some little way or form, whether it's a simple quirk of a character or the way somebody looks at somebody or its interpretation of a scene,
Mhm.
different things like that. Just it's just all a part of things. Uh, I There's a scene in my next book in Prometheus Engine of the young man Hunter has an encounter with one of the characters, an elf in there, and they're caught in a compromising position by his mother. And the funny thing is that happened to me and my wife when we were first married. And so when I was writing that scene, that again, that part of it, it's a part of that just came together, and it helps me in that. They give me my inspiration. My family is my inspiration.
That's awesome. And you've talked about your mother and your wife and kind of their involvement in and support of your writing. Um, Talk about if you could your children. Where do they stand? Are they reading your stuff? Do they like the fantasy steampunk?
Well, it's funny because my son is kind of not following exactly in his father's footsteps. He went to school for and has a degree in English,
Hmm.
and he wants to basically be a creative writing teacher and at the college level. He's still working on towards that goal and everything, trying to get there. It's a little hard with the pandemic. He was supposed to start into a job, and then when the pandemic hit, he wasn't able to because of they weren't doing in-person teaching
Hmm.
and such. So it's kind of pushed things down, but he still does his writing on the side, and he even reads my stuff for me, and helps me, makes suggestions and edits and things. So he's a big. My son has been a big help in that. My daughter's my biggest cheerleader on things. She helps me out whenever when I've gone to book fairs and things. Um, she's been there helping me selling stuff and helping draw people into me. So she's my biggest cheerleader.
That's great. It's so awesome that you can have that connection with family and doing something that you're really passionate about doing.
Yeah, it's and even my extended family, my I have my in-laws up, my brothers and sisters-in-law. They read my books, and they come out whenever I'm in the area and such, and they've also been a big vocal support for me as well and things, and so it's all been they've been great and everything.
It's great. Talk, if you would, for me. It's a little bit different question from the others we've been discussing here today, but I'm interested to get your take on it. Talk about ego as it relates to creatives. How do you think those without ego, or at least big egos, do you think they can get more out of their creativity?
I don't think you can do this without having a little bit of an ego because you have to look at it from this perspective when, especially in fantasy,
Hmm.
as a fantasy writer and everything. For lack of a better term, you're God because you're creating a world. You have to create the world, the people in it, the characters, the language. Google translates my best friend when it comes to languages because trying to it's I'm not Tolkien where I'm a linguist and I know how to create my own language. I can't do that. So I rely on other things for languages and such. So, you know, it's part of that, that you have to think of yourself. And again, going back to my D&D days, I'm a dungeon master. I control life and death in this world. And so you have to have that bit of an ego to do this. But at the same time, it has to be contained within that story. Yeah. I don't take it beyond that, because first off, my wife wouldn't let me. I can say that. I can honestly say that up front. She would not let me. And at the same time, you have to be in the moment, I think, when you're doing that, and just leave it on the paper. Best way I can say it.
Excellent. Your current job right now, your day job, if you will, you work for the Department of Housing and Urban Development as a writer and editor. You know, I want to talk a little bit about how the similarities help you continue to write the fantasy and steampunks that you do, because not many writers are working day jobs that are, you know, directly or even indirectly related to the creative pursuits that they're trying to do outside of the office.
Well, trust me, there's nothing really creative about what I do in working for the government. It is very straightforward. When, you know, the best thing I can say about that is that I love my job, that the work that I'm doing at HUD is helping people find that roof over their heads. Mm-hmm. You know, whether it's public housing, through the mortgage industry, you know, whichever the case may be. You know, we're the people at HUD. I've been, you know, I worked for the military for over, you know, like I said, 23 years active duty, and then over 7 years as a civilian. And, you know, it gets kind of, you know, where you know that side of things. And, you know, going from civilian, active duty to civilian was not really my cup of tea. Some people can do that. I couldn't do that. So I tried something different. So working for HUD has been that difference, and it's just been so much more rewarding in the things, you know. It's one of those, I guess the best way I can explain it is that when you think about a government bureaucracy, you think about the, you know, people boil down to the politics of life. Mm-hmm. And that's not the case here. No, we're not in our offices every day talking about the left and the right and which way approach we should be. Is we're talking about helping people. And that's what I love about my job, is that we're just trying to do that and work through the minutia, for lack of a better term, you know, in getting things done for the people of this country. And these people do it for, I've met people who've been working in the government for over 30 plus years, and how they do it day and days beyond me. But they're doing it, and they're not doing it for the paycheck. They're doing it because they honestly want to help people. And I see that in these great people that work at HUD, and I enjoy working with them. And it helps. I think that gives me that split that I need, is that here it's more analytical, and I'm able to focus on that and focus my mind in that aspect. And it makes me a little harder, especially when I'm looking at things, even in my own writing. You know, when I'm able to analyze things, not from a perspective of the story, but more of the structure. Mm-hmm. I think that's how it helps me in my other job as a self-published author.
I really appreciate you for taking and answering it along those lines, because I think sometimes as creators, you know, we get not necessarily bogged down, but it is really important that as you're trying to chase that dream, so to speak, that you're doing something not only to pay the bills. We all have to do something to pay the bills, but something that you're doing to pay the bills that you enjoy doing. You don't have to, you know, love what you're doing, but at least something that you enjoy, that's not going to leave you with this, you know, feeling of regret and just dirtiness at the end of the workday. But that's really awesome that you have that day job that is, you know, almost passionate about as well.
Well, like I said, it's one of those things that you do to get through things. As you know, I couldn't do my job or not my job, but my passion as a fantasy writer if I wasn't able to do my job that I do for the government.
Hmm.
It allows me to do both things, and it's been great, and I enjoy doing it. Yeah, like I said, it's you don't like the kind of the crush of DC that DC can have, and again, it's hard as a writer. You don't want to get boggled down in the politics of things. I people always ask me, why aren't you being more political in what you do? And it's like, because there are people on the left and people on the right who enjoy fantasy. I
Hmm.
don't. They're both fans. I'm not going to please one to tick off another, or
Sure.
vice versa.
Right.
I want to write for everybody, so I don't discuss politics whenever I do interviews or talks and things. I avoid that, and even in my writings, I mean, in the Outlander War, there was politics involved because you had the U.S. military finding Avalon, and you had the United States government trying to wedge their way in there. And
Hmm.
I didn't identify a political party with those people. I just said it was the U.S. government. I wanted to avoid that political leaning and
Sure.
things. And again, part of my writing is I avoid that. So it's you have to find that happy medium.
Yeah, I don't think that's a bad thing. I would say that I don't care if you're on the left, the right, or in the middle. I think we could all agree that the traffic in DC is absolutely abysmal.
It is absolutely. I will agree with that 100%. It's not as bad as it was before the pandemic. Before the pandemic was worse. It's a lot better now, but it can still get bad.
Mark, you continue to produce Corsair and the Sky Pirates, a steampunk historical fiction book, is going to be published in 2022. And you have a fantasy novella, The River of Souls, that is going to be published as well. Kind of looking beyond that, what more can we expect from Mark Piggott over the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years?
Well, again, I'm still working. I want to finish the Forever Avalon series. I planned it out as two trilogies, and the first one's done. So I've got book. I'm editing through book 4 to hopefully get that one out
Mhm.
and such. So I want to continue with that. Last Magus is all new to me, so I'm working, continuing to work on those stories. There's still a few more books left for that series as well. And again, with Corsair, I have to seeing how things goes. I can definitely see more stories from that as one from that storyline. Um, I have so much in my head. I've got like 2 or 3 other books planned out, just outlined some ideas, and we'll see how things go. But new fantasy stories that I'm working on and trying to and want to continue on. So I know I've got some more in me that I'm going to continue writing. Hopefully, a lot longer.
You got to be careful there because if you're not, your science is going to want to study that brain when it's all said and done.
God, I hope not.
So a part of the interview that I love doing with my guests is trying to find quotes that I think really relate to either the person or the creativeness of that person. So I selected for you a quote by George R. R. Martin, and in this quote he says, "The best fantasy is written in the language of dreams. It is alive as dreams are alive, more real than real, for a moment at least, that long magic moment before we wake." Now, I'm especially interested to get your take on this after our discussion earlier with the dreams that turn into your novels. But hearing that quote from George R. R. Martin, what is your interpretation?
I mean that says to me perfectly. It's exactly the way I am, and that's what it is in a sense for many writers. It's that when you have that story that running in your head, and you're trying to sleep, but something in there is just nagging at you, and makes you get up and take that pen to paper, like you said, and write down what's coming through. But yeah, it is. I think that the dreams. I did there was a thing from Edgar Allan Poe, and I'm it escapes me now, but there was a poem he did where he talked about how dreams are that next step from inside the mind of man.
Mhm.
Um, And I kind of use that. I did that in a psychology class. It was a presentation I gave her. That's how I remember it. I was talking about dreams, and I remember that quote from Poe. And it's that thing is that in your dreams, whether it's a daydream or when you're sleeping at night, that's the escape of the mundane, of the
Mhm.
everyday life. When you want to put aside what's going on around you and just get away from that, even if it's just for that split second, if you can do that, it helps ease the mind and levels you out to where you can continue on. And that's the thing about, again, with writers, is that we take that dream and we share it with everybody. And that's how we help the world, find those dreams of their own.
It's a great answer. I think Mr. Martin would be satisfied with that answer as well. What advice, Mark, would you give to someone that's listening to this, or if you encounter them at a convention, book signing, what have you, that has the talent to write fantasy, they enjoy it, but they're currently too afraid or not sure if they want to take that next step, or they feel they don't have the time to really develop it into a short story, a book, what have you?
My best advice for anybody who's wants to start out at writing is just, you have to get to it. You can't just say, I want to do this, I want to do this. No, you got to do it. You've got to sit down and start that first sentence, start writing it out.
Mhm.
When I wrote Forever Avalon, I didn't do an outline. I just started writing, and the story just came to me, and I just let it flow. And I think that's what's hampering a lot of people, is that they're afraid of that first step. But once you start it, it'll start coming naturally. The skills and that does take time to develop. You've got to learn the editing skills, sentence structure, every basics of grammar, punctuation, all of that. You've got to, that will come with time.
Mhm.
But if there's a story there, if you think it's good enough to tell, then just start writing it. The rest will come with time and practice. I mean, that's a lot of it. It's just I write every day. I'm putting something down every day, even if it's just, like I said, if it's just a sentence or two, it's something. And
Mhm.
you have to do that. You have to take that time. Um, if it means that much to you, then you just have to do it.
It's great advice. Great advice. Final question for you, Mark, just simply, what brings you the most joy and truly makes you happy?
As a writer, what brings me the most joy and makes me happy is just getting that review from somebody who said that they really loved my book. I can take the reviews, the good, the bad, and trust me, I've had some bad ones. I can take it. It's you learn and grow from the bad ones, but the
Uh-huh.
good ones, I think, is what as a writer just gives me the most joy, because that means that I did my job. I did something good for somebody else. I made them happy in my story that I gave to them. So I love getting that positive feedback from people that they enjoyed my story, that it was really something special to them. And so I always do that. Eh, But each and every day, I think it's just, I, being with my family, my wife, my kids. I love that aspect of it, because, again, being somebody who spent 20 out of 23 years, I spent 10 of those at sea.
Mhm.
So I spent a lot of time away from my kids and my wife. And you can't make up for that.
Mhm.
So you just take the time you have now, and you do everything you can, and you enjoy it as much as you can. And that's what I do. And so I'm not trying to make up for the past time. I'm just trying to do more with what I have.
Great answer. Mark, earlier you said, one of the answers, and it was kind of one of the things that stuck out to me in this interview, and there's so many of them. But you had said that we want to tell our stories. And Mark, I really appreciate you for telling us your story here today, and taking the time out. And once again, thank you again for your service. It's been a pleasure to talk to you today.
Well, I thank you for this great opportunity. And again, it was just a wonderful for me to be able to sit and talk with you.
Thanks so much. Thank you for taking the time to listen to Work Your Passion Episode 2. I know your time is valuable, and I'm honored that you dedicated a piece of it to my show. I also hope you enjoyed the amazing stories Mark shared with us today. He will be appearing at KatsuCon, being held February 18th through the 20th at the Gaylord National Resort and Convention Center in National Harbor, Maryland. If you're going to be in the area or want to make a trip, call 301-965-4000 for tickets and information. That's 301-965-4000. Be sure to check out the show notes for more about Mark, his writing, and how you can connect with him on social media. On Twitter, he's at forever_Avalon. His Instagram handle is foreveravalon.author. And on Facebook, it's Forever Avalon and then the number 1, all one word. You can learn more about his books and sign up for his blog at authormarkpiggott.wordpress.com. To be the first to know about new episodes of the Work Your Passion podcast, sign up for my newsletter using the link in the show description. My newsletter will not only link you to new episodes, but I share a small summary of my interviews as well. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a tip using the tip jar link. Proceeds will go to creating a better platform to share the stories of talented creatives with things like upgraded software, tech equipment, and time. Thank you again for listening. I look forward to continuing to share with you my passion, telling the stories of amazing people. So long and be well.